All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie Wright, and I work with Pete Upton, and I'm going to be helping facilitate this meeting today. We have a few more people joining, so we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We may still have some people joining us, and that is great, but I just want to go ahead and kick off this meeting today. My name is Julie Wright. I'm going to be helping Pete Upton facilitate, and we would just really like to thank James Clark and Ron Kelly on the call today to answer questions. So I wanted to go over just a couple of housekeeping rules today before we get started. If you could please keep yourself muted while you're not speaking, that definitely helps with the distractions. We're also going to use our chat box today. So if you have any questions, if you would please write your question in the chat box, we will still call on you to ask it. But then if we do not get to all the questions, we can go back and follow up with them later. We're also going to do something a little bit different with this meeting, that while a question is being asked or answered, if you would like to add to the question or ask for any clarification, we'd ask you to go down to the bottom of your screen, use your reaction, and do the raised hand. That'll assure that if there's any clarification needed, we can get that answered before we move on to the next question. We're going to try to keep all these questions and answers to just a few minutes apiece so we can get them all answered with hopefully a little bit of extra time at the end. So we're going to plan on 1 hour today and kind of see where it goes from there. And so again, I'd ask you, if you have a question, to go ahead and write it in the chat box so that we can answer it from there, or at least call on you from there. All right, Pete, would you like to say anything before we get started here?
I'd like to thank the Treasury for taking so much time to really make sure that we have the answers to the SSBCI. I'd like to thank James Clark and Ron Kelly, and Jeffrey Stout is on the call as well today. And we changed the format a little bit from a webinar to a meeting because we really want this to be interactive and ask the questions while you have the Treasury staff available. So please feel free to have this be an open dialogue, and we want a lot of interaction. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with Ron Kelly. And I know over the weekend, Ron, I sent you a few questions, and I don't know if you've received any more, but I'll let you and your staff go ahead and take over from here.
Great. So I'll just start with a few brief updates to make sure that we're all on the same page about where things stand in terms of the SSBCI program, right? So for tribal governments, NOIs were due as of 11:59 p.m. on Saturday. We had a Zoom room like this open for 15 hours that day. So if folks had questions, they could log in and ask us. And we had several that did and took advantage of that. So we're happy about that. And some folks submitted their NOI by PDF. For those who did that due to technical challenges, those are being processed, and the tribes that submitted that way will be getting a unique NOI identifier by email in the next couple days. So not all tribes did submit an NOI. So based on that, we will be doing a recalculation, right? And that will happen after the February 11th deadline. So it doesn't impact your application process. Just want to remind folks that as tribal governments are thinking about program design for the programs that they intend to use SSBCI dollars for, we do have assistance through Treasury that's available to tribal governments. We can connect you with subject matter experts and external consultants that we have on contract to help you think through those lending and investing programs. And just want to put a plug for some other webinars that we have planned this week because they may be of interest. We've heard from a lot of tribal governments that for them to be able to make this work, they're thinking about doing joint applications or finding partnerships. So we're doing a meeting like this where folks can talk about that later this week on the 16th at 4 p.m. Eastern. We're still doing a once a week office hours for tribal governments, and this week that will be tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. And we're also doing a webinar that's an overview of how venture capital programs play out with the SSBCI program, and that's at 4 p.m. on Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern on Friday. And so if you're interested in any of those opportunities, feel free to send me a chat, and I'll be sure to get you the information. And Pete, for your benefit, all of those registration links are in that SSBCI bulletin email that I forwarded to you, I think, late Friday too. So with that, we can get to questions.
Yeah, feel free to jump in and ask questions while we have Ron and James available. So do we have any first questions?
Hey Pete, this is Dave.
Yes.
I got a question. Thanks for hosting this again. So one of the things that we're running into here is and we're looking at like the participation or the collateral programs. One of the issues that we're running into is the 10x leverage requirement. I think it's a issue of what's the word? Scale, if you will. We've got so few with the two tribes that we're working with. We've got so few entrepreneurs, and even those and we have a lot of micro entrepreneurs that aren't really interested in taking debt, and the larger businesses that will take on debt need long-term debt. And so one idea that we had was doing like an introductory loan that would get refinanced as a way to kind of, play the regs, if you will, so that we can kind of show that leverage. Otherwise, the debt's just hanging out there for, possibly the term, and we don't get the 10x. Another thought that we had was trying to pull in other investors. And that's a kind of a long-term proposition. Another thought was to kind of pool the allocations of the two tribes that we're working with, such that the tribes would commit additional resources, non-federal, of course, for the match. And then each tribe would be able to kind of use that infusion of cash into the program, if you will, as leverage. And we're just trying to find as many ways as we can to try to kind of meet that 10x over the length of the program. And I think it's going to be difficult. I think the option that's preferred here is to do, one large loan to one of the tribal enterprises, like let's say for their C-store, such that, there's the one-to-one match, of course, and then do smaller loans for, a small handful of native-owned businesses from that tribe. But again, we've got a problem of scale, right? I mean, if wherein a state has its entire state population to make this available to, in a tribal setting, it's only got its tribal membership. And again, that tribal membership and the business community within that tribe is such that most of them are micro entrepreneurs who, as I said, are reluctant to take on debt. And then the bigger businesses need longer term debt. that won't allow us to kind of, turn this over as we might, on a statewide basis. So I'm wondering, it just seems like this, it's a problem that we run into a lot, which are federal programs that were not developed with tribes in mind. And then we apply that framework in a tribal setting and it doesn't quite fit. So I'm wondering if there's a way to kind of do some kind of waiver or, reduce that, that 10x to maybe a 2x or 5x. I'm not sure. I'm just kind of wondering what we can do there. We're really having trouble trying to figure out how we're going to meet that requirement.
Yeah, that's a tricky problem, and I think it all boils down to the extent to which non-SSBCI capital is available for the transaction. So that's either private capital in the form of loans that CDFI might make, tribal enterprise revenues that could be lent through a tribal lender or through a CDFI contributed into the pool, like you said, or some third party bank or whatever. So, I gather from lots of the questions that the easiest way, that the path of least resistance is sort of, putting in $1 of SSBCI against tribal enterprise funds, or as sort of a loan participation with a CDFI, and then you're at 1-to-1, and you've got transactions that are out there for 5+ years and difficult to turn into 10-to-1 leverage. Maybe just to explore the idea a little bit, the transactions that CDFIs are currently making or would like to make, if they had some additional credit enhancement, what are the character of those transactions? I hear you saying they're mostly, microloans.
Well, not
necessarily. Any other color there?
Yeah, the credit enhancements that we use right now is the BIA loan guarantee or BIA loan assurance programs, and typically our loans are kind of in the $250,000 range. Anything above that, we participate with others, and the reason why those work so well is because they tend to be below the threshold that a conventional lender would even consider or look at, especially if it's on reservation. And it certainly helps in terms of the credit analysis, having the guarantee there to fall back on. And it's a nice sweet spot because we've got delegated underwriting authority from the Bureau under 250. And it's consistent with our loan fund in terms of size, and then of course the term is such that it's usually we could kind of keep it within 60 to 84 months, so that's nice. We'd like it to be 18-24, just to kind of turn that money over, but nonetheless that's not what our clients need. They need longer terms. And certainly anything over the $250,000 mark, I mean, we're really needing 15 and 20 year money. As far as the micro lending goes, we don't do a whole lot of that. It's as it costs just as much to underwrite one of those deals as it does the quarter or $1.2 million deals. So the microloans we do are either in partnership with others or special funds that we have set aside. And it's usually no more than $10,000, and we won't take any collateral on them. And it's kind of an easier underwrite. But those also need to be stretched out. I mean, if you if you look at kind of, just the revenue potential that these organizations have. And they're home-based businesses for the most part. And typically, these households, on their personal side, their personal credit side, are over leveraged. Credit scores are low, and they've been, building their business off of credit cards and, factor loans and high priced debt. So we kind of are able to kind of take that debt out. But again, it's not anything that kind of turns over quickly as this program would kind of have us do. So that's kind of the flavor of the deals that we're doing.
Right.
Dave, could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Real quickly, based on what you just said, it sounds like a number of your clients might be involved in higher interest loans that they acquired in other locations and may need refinance. Is that what I'm hearing part of the need be?
Yeah, we could do that. That would be, but again, it's I think the difficulty is that for us, we work on a regional basis. So we're doing deals in, Arizona, New Mexico for sure, but California and Hawaii as well. Oklahoma, Washington, we're opportunistic there where we have contacts, and that's really what it takes. We need to have a broad geography to serve. If we're just looking at one tribal community, even if you just take, the largest tribe with an enrollment of 300,000, and then you kind of whittle that down. It's still a small population that you're serving. And then even if they're eligible from the revenues that they generate, will they qualify from a credit standpoint? So we need kind of have that. It'd be nice if the regulations allowed for a tribe to serve any enrolled tribal member wherever they're at, as opposed to just tribal members that are enrolled in their specific tribe, because we're talking about such a constrained market here. It's going to be difficult. And so that's why the preference is, if the allocation is in fact for the tribe, then please just let us use it for our tribal enterprise. We'll make one loan to one of our tribal enterprises and be done with it. And if there are tribal members who can qualify for this, then we'll support them as well. But, we're going to have to start beating the bushes and twisting people's arms to take loans. And that's not what we want to do. We don't want to force someone to take a loan that they're not ready for. We'd rather kind of make the investment with the tribal enterprise that we know has got the wherewithal to service the debt. But we've got the problem with the 10-to-1 issue.
Dave, this is Fatima. If I could just jump in your other, I wasn't sure if it was a question or comment, but absolutely the tribe can use these funds to invest in a tribal business enterprise that it owns or that another tribe owns. Can also invest in tribal citizens, either of your tribe, another tribe, non-natives. The tribe has flexibility in who to do business with. The only limitations is in regards to defining jurisdiction. So it's defined jurisdiction over your membership plan, but it's anywhere where your members are located. So some tribes have members in all 50 states, so you can invest in all 50 states. So it's not just limited to the citizens of a certain tribe, the tribe's investment decisions.
So, for example, and then we're getting a little complicated. It gets complicated, right? Because let's say there's a community member, right? There's a distinction between an enrolled tribal member and a community member. So we have an individual who is full-blood native, but they're only a quarter of the tribe that they belong to. And so technically speaking, they are not a tribal member. Can the tribe make a loan to that individual?
Yes. So the tribe, the other parts of the definition of jurisdiction is wherever you exercise jurisdiction. So some tribes do in fact exercise jurisdiction over their descendants or various members of tribal households in other states. The tribe gets to define its own. So if that's the individual that the tribe has jurisdiction over and you want to serve, you can.
How much scrutiny is is Treasury going to have over the decisions that are made? I mean, how
So
much do
the-
you have to prove?
Yeah, in the application, the tribe defines which states it's going to define its jurisdiction to be in, just so that we go for monitoring, but you're not asked to provide like tribal constitutions or policies or treaty, because there's each tribe has a different definition of its jurisdiction. So the application asks the tribes to list the regions that you're going to be acting in, but we're not asking for production of documents that over individual.
Perfect, thanks.
I see that there is some clarification asked from Lakota Vogel. Were your questions answered, or did you want any further clarification before we move on?
No, I think just the first one, it seems like, and this will get complicated as each CDFI's legal structure is different, but for my situation, sorry to make this personal, if I would like to administer the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe's dollars, I cannot be the lender, right? And I am not a tribal entity. I'm just a nonprofit, right, in partnership with the tribe, designated as their administrator, but now realizing I can't be the lender. Is that true? So because I basically in this application now need to go back to them and say they need to list somebody at the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe as the administrator so I can act as the participating lender. Right, Fatima?
That's right. So
Okay.
Can't outside of a tribal enterprise,
Yeah.
where there's subsidiaries filling different roles, and subject to the conflict of interest requirement in
Okay.
the guidance, you need to have separate entities. Roles.
Thank you. And you answered, Fatima, the question about geographic eligibility when you were responding to Dave. So thank you.
Great. Judy Meyer, would you like to ask your question that's in the chat box if it hasn't been answered already?
Yes, so I guess not to repeat specifically what's in the chat box, but so our organization is extremely new to this, any lending activity. I've done lending activities through other positions, but not with this organization. So if we indicate that we don't have those particular forms of lending already within something that we're doing, and if we don't have that particular experience, and we don't yet have a partner lined up to manage that for us, I'm wondering how that will be regarded by the reviewers in terms of granting an award. Because we do intend to have a partner, we just don't know yet who that is or when we'll have them.
Do you have a program in mind, or are you looking to develop that in conjunction with your partner? I mean,
So
if you put forward an application, could you explain what you're trying to do with the funding, or what would that look like?
Yeah, so we definitely want to implement our own small business development loan program. And we can manage that on our own. I've had some experience with that in other jobs. But we also want to do maybe some either equity investing or some other type of larger loan instrument or venture capital that we haven't done in the past, and we'll look to have a partner with those programs.
Okay. Well, for an application, I mean, just stepping back a little bit, for an application to be approved, the jurisdiction would have to explain how they will meet each of the eligibility requirements. 10-to-1, 1-to-1, capital at risk, et cetera. Be able to describe the program, how the funds would be used, and then, answer all the questions in the application. If you haven't had a chance to preview those, I definitely recommend that you do. It's probably the case that a number of jurisdictions will be in the process of finalizing selection of partners through the application process. And there's definitely some gray area here, I think. If a jurisdiction can define the program, they're just deciding who's going to run it for them. That's probably something that could go through. If a jurisdiction can't define the program and doesn't have a partner, that would be more difficult, I think. So we should probably work together over the next couple months, all of us, I guess, as a group, and the applicants, to try to identify and define those programs as much as possible, so these applications can go through.
Okay, thank you.
Right, we have a question from Tom Coleman next about how could private capital help? Tom, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So the question is, how could private capital, especially private capital that has a social orientation, so it's not necessarily looking for top return, how could it help? How much, what's the scope and scale of that private capital, if it would be helpful, and in what form, whether debt, equity, long-term, whatever. I would just appreciate some commentary on that.
Sure. So the basic structure, I think, of the program is to try to identify, use the public money to encourage private capital to come to the table for small business lending and investing products. And that could include these various sorts of credit enhancement or portfolio insurance programs. So, a tribal government could guarantee CDFI loans, could guarantee private lender loans. It could participate as a co-lender in a loan. So CDFI makes a loan, and either a couple of different models. One on loan participations where CDFIs are sort of a subordinate lender to a bank loan, and then the tribal government buys that participation. And of course, the CDFI could manage all of that. Another loan participation model is sort of co-funding loan, where the CDFI makes a loan and the tribal government makes a subordinate loan to that CDFI loan, and perhaps the CDFI manages, services all of those transactions. And then there are various forms of credit enhancement, including just cash collateral. And then there's the CAP program, which maybe I'll hold off on discussing, because I think it makes the most sense in situations where there's a higher volume of homogeneous loans. But we can get into that in a minute if you'd like. In terms of the private capital, one theoretical possibility under the guidelines is that a tribal government credit enhance a loan to a CDFI. So if you had identified a bank looking for CRA credit, or another lender, that loan could potentially be credit enhanced to a CDFI. Of course, any lending that follows from that CDFI would have to be compliant with the SSBCI rules, and traceable in that way. So that's one. Those are a couple ways on the lending side that think about private capital, whether it's coming into a CDFI, whether it is funds CDFI is already raised, and their lending is credit enhanced by SSBCI. On the venture capital side, there's a whole nother world. There's actually a webinar this Friday that'd be good to listen into if you're interested in that side, that is to think through all the possibilities. Excuse me, and that's primarily done through investing in funds where there's private capital that at least matches the SSBCI capital. It can also be done directly from a state-sponsored entity if one exists, or a public entity if one exists and has the appropriate background. So I'm not sure if I'm getting to the crux of your question, but that's just sort of a scan of the landscape of different types of credit enhancement investment programs and how SSBCI funds could support them.
And what can you say about scale? What size of capital would be useful if it's private capital?
Well,
what range?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, how can a jurisdiction or a group of jurisdictions that co-apply develop a program that's sort of meets the program requirements, right? And that's what we were wrestling with at the opening of the session. Like, how do you, because anyone that applies needs to demonstrate a reasonable expectation that the funds will crowd in, for lack of a better word, $10 in private funding for every dollar in public investment and SSBCI dollars. It really comes down to what is my program, or what is my mix of programs, and how will they achieve that over time. You may have one program that's very low leverage, just 50% participation in the tribal enterprise C-store that we were talking about at the beginning. And then because that's a lower leverage, identifying something to offset that, guaranteeing smaller dollar loans, guaranteeing microloans, or a microloan cap program, any sort of credit enhancement program where the dollars are supporting a lower percentage of the transaction. We calculate leverage for venture capital in a different way, which includes not just the immediate transaction, but also transactions that follow that, called follow-on investment. So that's another way to balance it out if that's appropriate for your marketplace or your target. So it's hard to say, if you get an allocation of $10 million, what's the target for private capital? It's really $100 million, but it's that over 10 years plus, and that includes sort of recycling of funding. So if there's a loan that's guaranteed and then paid back and then put back out again, that still counts as the same SSBCI dollar. Can be levered over and over again. So the most common, James can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the most common uses of funds for CDFIs were where CDFIs and states partnered. And I realize it's not a direct corollary, but just for reference, were the loan participation programs, where there's some sort of co-funding of a loan or a purchase of a participation. A couple CDFIs did a great volume in cap lending, which is a portfolio insurance and is really high leverage. So, they did hundreds and thousands of loans where they got, 5% to 7%, roughly, portfolio insurance that would take a first loss of any loans up to the amount of that insurance pool. But again, those tend to work only where there's relatively high volume. And some CDFIs participated in guarantee programs, mostly banks, if I remember correctly. But if we looked to the state CDFI interaction for any kind of indication of what might work, it was a sort of co-funding that was probably the most frequent. And then, I guess I should also, the other model that wasn't really used very frequently, but is out there, is this guaranteeing of or credit enhancing a loan to a CDFI, which might be something. James, am I missing anything?
No, I think it depends on the target type of loan you're doing. The cap loans work very well in the micro loan environment where you're dealing with smaller loan amounts and higher volume. Your loan participations tend to work with larger amounts. Your loan guarantees, collateral supports tend to work in working capital type of loans very well. So it depends on what your market is and your borrower needs. You're going to structure a program that's going to work best for the needs of your tribal members and for your lending institution.
All right. I see some questions in the chat box here. I don't know, do any of them follow up to this topic specifically? If so, go ahead and jump in now.
Hey, Julie, Blair Thomas had a question, a follow-up to Lakota's.
Yeah.
Blair, are you on?
Yeah, I am. Good morning. Well,
Good
it's still morning here. Thanks, Pete. Yeah, just a couple of quick follow-ups to Lakota's questions about administration, kind of a dual role or possibly a dual hat. Is it possible to have two different, well, you could have two different programs with a CDFI. You could obviously have kind of a loan participation program where you will participate with a CDFI loan, or you supply the funds to the CDFI if they want to participate with a bank loan. Those were two options I think I just heard Jeff discuss. But if a tribe had a big enough CDFI or joined in with a big CDFI like Dave's got and said, well, we want to do 2 or 3 programs. We want, for example, a loan guarantee program that the tribe itself doesn't have the experience to administer. Could the tribe, in effect, hire a CDFI to administer its loan guarantee program for non-CDFI loans? So if the tribe said, I'm going to go get a lending network, I'm going to get the local bank or 2, I might get Bank of America, and my credit union. And I'm going to do loan guarantees through them and hire the CDFI to actually administer that loan guarantee for them. So not the CDFI loan itself, somebody else's loans. And then at the same time, say to the CDFI, we'll do a loan participation program with you, or we'll give you the funds to do a loan participation program with Bank of America. Is that they're not administering their own loan guarantee, but is that a scenario that's possible, Jeff, under the and Fatima, under the kind of mix of dual roles?
Yeah, I mean, I think right. I think that what you described in terms of a CDFI managing a guarantee program on behalf of the tribe is reasonable. What you wouldn't want to do is have it guaranteeing the loans it makes, right?
No,
Because
it would guarantee
that's
somebody else. It would guarantee another lender's loans.
understood. So that makes sense. I do want to note for any of these where you hire a third party to administer, the tribal government is still the counterparty to the agreement with Treasury and still has responsibility for overseeing the program. So while they might not be, conducting the underwriting or servicing the transaction or whatever, they're still responsible for adherence to the compliance rules. And so in all cases, the states and now the tribes should have some level of oversight on transactions. Right?
Yeah, I assume that's what the implementing entity's job is.
Correct.
Versus your counterpart, your contractor. Let me ask a question about follow up on the contractor then. In the policy guidance, the Treasury has said it's not written in stone, but it sounds like, or it seems like Treasury is requiring the jurisdictions to have an open competition for people they contract with to administer their programs.
There's not a requirement. They do have to, they should address how their selection process was fair and open, but it doesn't require an RFP or any particular procurement process, given how much those vary from state to state.
But it does sound like we have to say something about, we selected our own CDFI because.
Right.
Like we don't have to go and act like we tried to hire somebody else, do we?
No.
Okay. And then the last question I had was on Dave's point earlier about kind of this one-to-one match. And I know the guidance says no tribal funds, state funds, or federal funds can be the source of the one-to-one match. But as I think, most folks know, native CDFIs are mostly capitalized, especially in the beginning, by federal money. Some are capitalized by by tribal money. So if you're doing a program with directly with the native CDFI, and let's say you're doing a loan guarantee or loan participation, and their portion of the loan is your one-to-one match, right? You do a 50% loan guarantee. That's automatically a one-to-one, but their dollar is coming out of Treasury, right? It's Treasury CDFI program. How are we going to be able to avoid that rule when our CDFIs, at least again in the beginning, and many still are heavily capitalized initially by federal or tribal money?
Yeah, understood. For many reasons, including the difficulty of tracing those proportions, we did not we sort of looked through the CDFI, so we did not require a CDFI partner to use segregated funds or estimate what proportion of its funds were federal versus non-federal, et cetera. So I think this is a good candidate for an FAQ to clarify and give comfort to everyone. But last time around, CDFIs were treated like any other lender. In the program, they are named as a financial institution in the statute.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful to clarify that, because I've gotten quite a few questions about, well, our money came from the feds and that's what we're lending out now. And so.
Yeah, no, there's no intention to reduce CDFI's ability to participate in the program. They're key component of being able to deploy funds, and were in the first program, and I believe should be in this one, treated as private capital. But we'll give that some thought and see if we can clarify for you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Thank you.
All right, Dave, you had a question in the chat box next. I don't know if that last segment kind of clarified. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Dave, to your question?
Yeah, I think I might be confusing the 1x and the 10x, right? Because we've got multiple investors. So it's just kind of a question is, do all those investments count for leverage, or do you just count the CDFI's investment as one?
Dave, on the question, it's going to depend on the structure of the loan. So if you have 5 funders and each of the 5 private sources are putting in $1 into the loan, and the SSBCI is putting in $1, then you got a 5-to-1 leverage. If you have private funding coming from 5 different sources, but the total going into the loan is $1 and you only have $1 of SSBCI, that's 1-to-1 leverage. So it'll depend on how your loan is structured and how much private capital is in the loan itself.
Right, but it's really an accounting question then, right? Because let's say one of our investors says, you know, the investment is made to you, you make the loans as you see fit. You don't have to come to us for any kind of approval of the investments. You know, use it as an internal.
Right.
Yeah.
Dave, I think, or James, I think the distinction here is between between a CDFI making a loan on its own and what counts as private capital coming out of the CDFI, as opposed to at the transaction level, if there are multiple lenders, you know, what counts as private capital. So you're saying as a CDFI, your very business is to aggregate funds from different sources and lend them out. And you want to know, how do we know which of those sources are private and which aren't? I think it's similar to the last question we received, in that we didn't ask CDFIs to demonstrate what their source of funds were, what ratio, what proportion of their funds came from which sources. We simply allowed them to participate as financial institutions.
So is there a need to have, you know, 5 sets of loan documents to demonstrate that 5x, or is 1 set of loan docs sufficient?
No. When a CDFI makes a loan, it's, you know, lending commingled funds, and we understand that.
Excellent, thanks.
All right, we're just under 15 minutes left today in today's meeting here. Are there any other questions that haven't been answered? Go ahead and type them in the chat box, or just go ahead and unmute yourself right now. Is there any additional clarification that any of our speakers, Ron or James or Jeffrey, any additional clarification you'd like to make at this time?
Hey, I've got a question, and I think I understand it. That was emailed to me. Is how does this affect the 10-to-1 match? If a certain percentage, and we'll just throw out a percentage there, of 20% of the loans that are made default or are not collectible within the first 3 or 4 years. And, you know, for example, if the allotted amount was $1 million and 20% of those loans are not collectible, how does that affect your 10-to-1 match at the end of the period?
Yeah, so a couple clarifications. So first, the 10-to-1 requirement is applied at the application time period, right? So you will enter certain parameters, estimates about what your portfolio is going to look like, and it will calculate based on assumptions about recycling a leverage projection. Over the time period of the allocation, we'll also calculate just to track what actually happened. But, you know, understanding that it's virtually impossible to get 10-to-1 out of the gate. It's a cumulative effect. Therefore, it's not sort of an ongoing compliance requirement. Now, back to your question itself, if you made $10 million in loans and lost $2 million within the first 2 years, when it comes time to recycle those funds into another loan, you'll have 20% less than you did before to be able to generate private investment. So your leverage projections will be lower because of that. But I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what they were meaning was, yeah. Do we have any other?
Yeah, 10 minutes left today. Are there any other questions or feedback before we sign off today?
I have a question if no one else does. Just generally, if people are willing to share what kind of whether they're having interactions with tribal governments, or you're part of a tribal government, and you have a plan that you're working on, like what direction are you going? What looks like it might work? It might be helpful to share amongst a group some ideas.
Want us to write it in the chat box or
just
go ahead and okay. Well, Shirley's on here. She's the director of Telefund now, and so I'm a consultant. I was the former executive director, and so we have a pool of ocean fishermen and a local bank that's interested in working with Telefund, and so it's working out the details. But the nation did submit the notice of intent, and we are, moving forward with working on a plan. We haven't yet, but we've been trying to establish the partnership and so forth. So there's just a lot of nuances around this, as we've all been discussing. So that's the only thing with the ocean fishery. Sometimes it's a boat loan. So I'm hoping to try to get some one-on-one TA with that, because it's a bigger discussion than an answer on the Zoom. But I guess one question I do have is, native CDFIs usually don't get into selling their loans because we like to stay close to our close-knit communities. However, is that a way for some of these longer-term loans to be able to work with each other to sell the loans to each other or to another close party, to then turn the loan around? I don't know how that works because I'm not.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think potentially, but keep in mind, if you sold a loan with the protection, right, then you would have maybe some capital back into the CDFI, but you'd have less the same amount of SSBCI dollars would still be encumbered. They would just be encumbered to another entity, depending on the model. But it's something we're happy to explore more. And we're also happy to talk directly on the boat loan model and what that looks like or could look like.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's been an interesting process, to say the least.
Hi, this is Cheryl Ravis, and I represent the Blackfeet tribe. And I did have a question in the chat box. For the most part, it was answered, but I think I'm still a little bit unclear about what's next. So we went ahead and submitted our NOI, and I got the unique identifier number. Then I submitted the initial application, even though it wasn't due until February 11th. I still submitted it because we were ready to. And we answered sections 1 through 10. And so my question was, is there more that we have to do for February 11th? Is there going to be more sections added to this application? And then I asked for a copy of the application because I couldn't get a copy, print, there's no button there to print the application I submitted. And I was just told that that would be coming, where we'd have access to getting copies of our applications we submitted. So that was my question, and I don't know if I was being unclear. I just wanted to know if there was more sections coming that we need to be aware of. I know I was told to go to the application user guide, but like I said, we answered sections 1 through 10. I don't know if there's more. I guess it'll be under review then, and then you'll just let me know if there's something missing. Is that?
So I'm going to defer to maybe Ron or Peter, but yeah, the initial application is just a handful of fields that had red text next to them, basically naming the type of program, et cetera, and who is going to implement it. And then there's quite a number of other fields, including identifying any contractors, describing each program and how each program meets each of the key eligibility requirements, describing the capacity of the government or its contractors to administer the program, and describing sort of its oversight capacity, among other questions. So if you answered all of those questions, then your application is probably complete. But I'm not sure if you did. I just don't know off the top of my head if anyone actually went through all of the questions.
We did, and we uploaded, information as we were told to, like a tribal resolution, the narrative for the staff compliance and oversight. The CDFI prepared those answers, but I'll just wait because I think, I'll probably hear from somebody. They'll review it and let me know if there's something missing or that needs to be more detail needed. All right.
Yeah, that's generally how it'll go. There'll be a person assigned to review. The first thing we'll do is double check that it's actually complete, and that that the answers are generally basically sufficient, that there aren't any big holes, and we'll come back to you. And then once they go through and go through our review procedures to demonstrate that that you've met the eligibility requirements, there's oftentimes some interaction there. We'll ask for clarification, allow you to submit some additional information if necessary.
All right, thank you.
Sure, I'll also flag this for another person on the team, so you can hear from them this week, just so you have some peace of mind and you're not waiting for a long time to get an answer to that.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, we just have a couple minutes left. Are there any last minute questions or comments before we head off today?
So Jeff, you asked us if we've got any program design that's kind of bubbling to the top. Have you guys seen any novel program design from tribes that you can share with us?
Well, I mean, I'm going to defer to the relationship managers who've been having more outside conversations than I have. I think the only conversation that I've had recently was a tribe that was interested in sort of creating its own CDFI, and therefore starting a small loan fund in conjunction with a bank lender, and using SSBCI to provide a layer of protection for that bank lender to help them demonstrate a track record of lending, et cetera. So that's one iteration. And then, I think there are some that are exploring the loan participation models from Georgia and Montana, where CDFIs interacted with the state to deploy funds. I've heard, but I'm not aware of direct interaction with the states, where some tribal governments are thinking about joining forces there so that where a state may have more infrastructure in place to administer, and basically putting transactions through a state program, or a state program that's tweaked to be appropriate for the tribal government's target. I don't know, James and Zachariah, anyone else hearing any other interesting ideas? Ron, I just haven't been on the front
Not
line.
at this point, Jeff. The only thing that I have heard and most of the people on this call are aware of is that some of the states are doing outreach to native CDFIs to participate in the state programs as well, so that you would have a combination of access to funds. So both from the state and through your ties with tribal governments.
And just to quickly add on to everything that Jeff just mentioned, I've heard, but again, you have to kind of really see this precipitate multi-tribal venture capital funds, or a jurisdiction that has a large preliminary application, thinking of multiple equity investment strategies, multiple funds.
All right, looks like we have one last question from Joel Smith. If we can just answer that really quick, and then we'll sign off for today. Joel, would you like to ask your question? Or maybe we can type the answer in the chat box. We'd just like to know, where to see details on guaranteeing a loan to a CDFI as an eligible use. That was the question there in the box.
Yes, it is. See if I can find it while we're talking. Anyone can beat me there, please do. But I'm looking in the guidance that there's a footnote, I believe. SSBCI. Give me 1 second. I think I'm almost there. Yeah, page 23. And it is page 23, footnote 25. That's the place I'm thinking of. There may be one other spot. So there it describes a loan, but it could be a guarantee of a loan to a CDFI or a loan to a CDFI, as long as there's private capital matching.
Well, thank you so much. As we wrap up today, we just like again to thank James Clark, Ron Kelly, Jeffrey Stow, and everyone else who participated in this conversation today. Pete, do you have anything to say before we sign off today?
Yeah, we will be sending updates that Ron had mentioned out. We'll send a e-blast again, probably the end of the day or first thing in the morning of the upcoming webinars that Ron had mentioned. And then please feel free to email me questions, because Ron's been very responsive in answering questions. I'll go ahead, I forward those to him. So please email me any questions that you have, and we can get them turned around relatively quickly. So I thank you. And again, reach out to me if you have any questions, and I'll follow up with Ron and James and Jeffrey. And I want to thank you, Ron, James, and Jeffrey, for being so diligent and providing the amount of time that you have for the native CDFIs. Truly appreciated.
Thank you. No, looking forward to working with you. I know you guys are going to be crucial to making this program work. So Thanks for everything you're doing.
You bet. Thank you.